Hey guys, tonight we are packing our lightest tunic and a very open mind, because we're taking a trip back to ancient Athens, and I'm not talking about the shiny, marble white Athens you see in the movies. All gleaming temples and profound philosophers strolling in pristine gardens. No, we're going to the real, gritty, and frankly, quite smelly one. Let's be honest, dropped into the 5th century BC with your modern sensibilities. You'd probably get scanned, pickpocketed, or step in something truly awful within the first hour. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below with your city and what time it is for you. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from, whether it's a sunny afternoon in Sydney or a late night in London. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background home. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air that hits you first isn't the clean, crisp Mediterranean breeze you imagined. It's thick, heavy, and layered. You've just arrived, perhaps on a merchant ship docking at the bustling port of Piraeus, and now you're making your way towards the city proper. The dominant scent is the sea, of course, salt and drying fish, but underneath, it is a complex bouquet of charcoal smoke, roasting meat, olive oil, and the unmistakable, pungent aroma of 1,000 unwashed bodies pressed together. You pull your cloak a little tighter, not from the cold, but as an instinctive barrier. This is your first night in Athens, the cradle of democracy, and it feels overwhelmingly alive. You're walking the long road, sheltered by the famous long walls that connect the port to the city, a vital artery protecting Athens from land-based attacks. As you pass through the city gates, the world narrows. The streets here are not the grand, wide avenues of Rome that will come centuries later. They are a tangled, confusing maze of unpaved dirt lanes, barely wide enough for 2 carts to pass. There are no street names, no signs. You navigate by landmarks, a particular fountain, a well-known statue, or the ever-present silhouette of the Acropolis high above, its marble gleaming faintly even in the moonlight. Up there, the goddess Athena Parthenos stands watch over her city, a symbol of wisdom, order, and divine protection. Down here, however, in the tangled guts of the city, other, more earthly gods seem to hold sway. There are no streetleted. Of course, the only light comes from the sliver of a moon and the flickering oil lamps from inside the low, mud brick houses you pass. Their windows are small, unglazed openings, and through them you catch fleeting glimpses of domestic life. Hear the murmur of voices, the cry of a baby, shadows dance and stretch, playing tricks on your eyes. A stray dog darts out from an alley, and you jump. Every corner feels like a potential ambush. Historians still debate just how dangerous these streets were after dark. Some argue that for a freeborn citizen, it was relatively safe, a space policed by a sense of community, where everyone knew their neighbors. Others paint a far grimmer picture, a place where only the wealthy, escorted by torch-bearing slaves, would dare to venture out, lest they fall prey to muggers or drunken brawls spilling out of a local tavern. You, a stranger, decide it's probably wise to stick to the more traveled paths. As you walk, you notice something else. This isn't just a city going to sleep. From behind the closed doors of the larger courtyard houses, you hear bursts of laughter, the clear, ringing notes of a lyre, and the rhythmic clapping of a drinking game. These are the sounds of a symposium, the famous Athenian drinking party, a world closed off to most, but a vital part of the city's social fabric. It's a world of men, of wine, of poetry, and, as you'll soon discover, of carefully negotiated desire. The sound is a constant reminder that behind these plain, unassuming walls, a whole other Athens exists. You also have to watch where you're stepping, and I mean that literally. The concept of a city-wide sanitation system is a distant dream. Household waste, including the contents of chamber pots, is often unceremoniously tossed into the street. The grime and refuse underfoot are a constant, slippery hazard. This is a tiny, almost disgusting detail that history books often forget, but it's fundamental. The scent of waste is a permanent part of the city's air. a bizarre counterpoint to the smell of incense drifting from a nearby household shrine. It's a city of profound contradictions. Finally, you pass a doorway that is slightly ajar. A woman's silhouette is briefly visible, bathed in the warm lamplight from within. She says something in a low voice to a man who is lingering outside. It's not a greeting between neighbors. There's a quiet intensity to the exchange, a transaction of words that feels heavier than a simple purchase of bread or wine. The man nods, slips something into her hand, and disappears inside. The door closes, leaving you alone in the dark again. You don't know who she was. A wife greeting her husband, a slave running an errand, or something else entirely. The ambiguity hangs in the cool night air. You find a small, noisy inn to rest for the night. The sounds of the city seeping through the thin walls. As you drift off, you realize that the pulse you felt on the streets wasn't just the city's heartbeat. It was the rhythm of want, of need, of commerce, and you get the feeling that tomorrow, in the bright, unforgiving daylight of the agora, you'll hear it even more clearly. The morning sun doesn't so much wake you as it does assault you. It streams through the single opening in your small room at the inn, unfiltered and unapologetic. The noise from the street below has already reached a fever pitch. It seems Athens doesn't believe in a gentle start to the day. You pull on your tunic, splash some cold water on your face from a clay basin, and step out into the chaos. Your destination today is the agora, the very heart of the city, and as you get closer, the hum you heard last night transforms into a full-throated roar of human activity. If last night was about shadows and whispers, today is about blinding sun and open proclamations. You find yourself standing at the edge of a vast, open square, teeming with people. This is it, the agora. It's not just a marketplace. It's the city's civic, commercial, and social nucleus. All of Athenian life flows through this space. Your senses are immediately overwhelmed. The air is a jumble of smells: roasting chickpeas, baking bread, pungent goat cheese, the metallic tang of a blacksmith's forge, and the sweet, cooling scent of perfume from a vendor selling tiny terracotta vials of it. The noise is a symphony of bartering, shouting, laughing, the bleating of a goat being dragged to a sale, the hammering of a stonemason, and underneath it all, a constant, low murmur of 1,000 conversations happening at once. You begin to walk, trying to take it all in. You pass stalls piled high with olives, figs, and gleaming fish caught just this morning. You see potters displaying their famous red and black figure vases, some depicting heroic myths, others, well, depicting scenes that are decidedly less heroic and much more graphic. This is your first clue. In Athens, the sacred and the profane aren't just coexist. They are often sold at the same stall. You see men gathered around a water closet, the KLEPS Dura, listening intently as an aspiring politician practices a speech, his time literally dripping away. Nearby, another group is examining a white wooden board, a SAMUS, where new laws and public announcements are posted. Everything here is out in the open, and that's when you start to really listen. You drift past a group of bearded, well-dressed men leaning against a column of a stove. One of the lawn-covered walkways that offer shade from the relentless sun. You expect to hear them debating the nature of the soul or the merits of democracy, and maybe they were a minute ago. But what you actually overhear is one man complaining, quite loudly, about the price of a skilled flute girl for his upcoming symposium. His friend laughs and suggests Civic brothel down in the Care Amicos district, the Potter's Quarter, which was also famously home to the city's red light district. He names a price, so many oboes, as casually as if he were discussing the cost of a good amphora of wine. This is a bit of a shock. You thought these topics would be relegated to back alleys and hush tones, but here, in the agora, under the watchful gaze of the temple of Hephaestus, the business of desire is just that, business. It's another commodity to be assessed, haggled over, and publicly reviewed. A bit further on, you see two men, one clearly older and wealthier, the other a handsome youth in his late teens. The older man is gesturing animatedly, talking about a recent speech in the assembly. It looks like a classic mentorship scene, the kind Plato wrote about. But then the older man steers the youth towards a stall selling expensive imported cloaks, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder just a little too long. It's a public display of patronage that feels charged with something more than just educational guidance. Here's a little tidbit you wouldn't find in most textbooks. Scattered amongst the debris on the ground, you might see broken pieces of pottery called ostrata, while famously used for voting to ostracize, to exile, a politician. These shards were the ancient equivalent of scrap paper. People used them for receipts, notes, and tallies, and historians still debate this. But it's highly plausible that some of these fragments were used for much more personal transactions. A quick, scribbled IOU, a note to meet someone later, or even a crude token for services rendered. The most intimate arrangements could be sealed on a piece of literal garbage. You lean against a sun-warmed wall, trying to process it all. The Agora is a place of dizzying contrasts. Over there, you can see a group of men heatedly discussing the upcoming trial of a general. A few feet away, a slave trader is displaying his human wares, their bodies inspected and discussed with the same detachment as livestock. You hear a snippet of a philosophical argument about virtue, only to have it drowned out by a merchant hawking cheap wine. There's no separation. Politics, philosophy, commerce, and raw, undisguised lust all mingle in the same dusty square. The line between a public forum and a public marketplace is completely blurred. You look up at the Acropolis, high on its rocky perch. It seems so serene, so orderly from down here. A monument to ideals, to beauty, to the triumph of the human intellect. But down here in the Agora, the messy, complicated, and deeply transcational engine of the city is on full display. And you're beginning to understand that to comprehend Athens, you can't just look at the temples on the hill. You have to get your feet dirty in the marketplace below, where everything and everyone seems to have a price. The whispers you hear are not secrets. They are price lists. As you spend more time in the Agora, a fundamental truth about Athenian society begins to crystallize. And it's a truth defined by a simple, stark division. Look around you. The crowd that bustles, debates, trades, and governs is almost exclusively male. You see men of all ages and stations, wealthy aristocrats in fine, bleached linen chitons, their slaves trailing behind them, grizzled farmers in from the Attic countryside, their skin leathery from the sun, craftsmen with calloused hands and dusty tunics, and young, athletic men, their bodies honed in the gymnasium, moving with an easy confidence. This is their work, the public sphere, the Agora, the PNYX hill where the assembly meets. The Lockwards, the gymnasia, is a man's domain. Where are the women? You scan the crowd again, more carefully this time, and you do see them. But they exist in the periphery, in specific, prescribed roles. You see a few older women, probably from poorer families, managing market stalls, their faces etched with a lifetime of hard work. You see slave women, sent by their mistresses to fetch water from the public fountains, their conversations quick and hushed as they balance heavy hydria on their heads. They move with a purpose, a sense of being on an errand, not of lingering or participating. They're functional, almost invisible threads in a tapestry dominated by men. The respectable citizen woman, the wife or daughter of an Athenian man, is conspicuously absent. Her place is at home. In the oikos, this concept of the oikos is everything. It's more than just a house. It's the household, the family unit, the center of private life and the foundation of the state. You follow a man as he leaves the Agora, heading for one of the residential districts. He arrives at a house there. From the outside, is utterly plain. A high, windowless wall facing the street with a single, solid wooden door. There's a reason for this design. It's meant to shield the interior world from the exterior, to protect what's inside, his property, his lineage, and most importantly, his wife. He knocks, and a slave opens the door. You catch a glimpse inside. The house is built around a central, open-air courtyard. This is the woman's world. The ground floor, the andron, is the men's quarters, where the master of the house would entertain his friends for the symposium. But the upper floor, or the rooms at the back of the house, or the Guinea icon it is, the women's quarters. This was the domain of the citizen wife. It was here she would spend the vast majority of her life, spinning, weaving, managing the household slaves, and raising the children. It was a life of confinement, portrayed by orators and playwrights as a mark of respectability. To be a good wife was to be an invisible wife. Her name unspoken in public, her face unseen by strangers. Here's a curious little detail that highlights this separation. The front door of a typical Athenian house often had two knockers or rings, one higher than the other. The higher one was for visitors on horseback, but many also had a specific type of lock that could only be opened from the inside, essentially making the woman a prisoner in her own home, at least in the symbolic sense. The man could come and go as he pleased, but her movements were strictly controlled by her husband or male guardian, or Kyrios. The contrast is jarring. A man's honor was tied to his public actions, his bravery in battle, his eloquence in the assembly, his contributions to the city. A woman's honor, specifically that of a citizen wife, was tied exclusively to her sexual fidelity and her seclusion. Her primary, almost so, purpose was to produce legitimate heirs to continue her husband's family line and, by extension, the citizen body of Athens. Her desire, her intellect, her ambitions, these were not considered relevant. They were, in fact, a potential threat to the stability of the oikos. Historians, of course, are still fiercely debating the reality versus the ideal. Was the seclusion of women as absolute as the famous speeches of men like Demosthenes would have us believe? Or was this an ideological construct, a sort of best practice that many families, especially poorer ones who couldn't afford to keep a woman idle, simply couldn't adhere to? Archaeological evidence from houses suggests a more fluid reality, with spaces not always so rigidly divided. It's likely that women found ways to create their own social networks, visiting female neighbors, participating in all-female religious festivals like the DSM Euphoria, and maintaining a rich, unseen social life. But the official, stated ideal remained one of strict separation. So you have this stark duality. The man, the public creature, his life played out on the sun-drenched stage of the city. The woman, a private creature, her life contained within the shadowy walls of the home. This division is the bedrock upon which Athenian society is built, and it creates a profound imbalance. Men, free to roam the city and seek companionship and pleasure wherever they saw fit, had a whole spectrum of options available to them. Women had almost none. This fundamental inequality is the key to understanding everything that follows. It's the silent premise behind every transaction in the agora, every joke at the symposium, and every law passed in the assembly. The world of desire you are about to explore is built entirely on this gendered fault line. Tonight, you've managed to get an invitation, not to the inner circle. Of course, you're not a philosopher or a general, but you are a guest, allowed to observe from the edges of a symposium. You follow your host through the now familiar plain doorway, past the central courtyard, and into the undrawn, the men's dining room. The moment you step inside, you know you've entered a different realm. The room is surprisingly small and intimate. Padded couches, or clinei, line the rows, and the air is already fragrant with wine, expensive oils, and roasting meat. The guests, all men, are reclining on the couches, two to a couch, propped up on their left elbows. This posture itself is significant. It's a stance of leisure, of civilization, separating them from the barbarians who, according to the Greeks, sat upright on chairs to eat. Even their relaxation is a statement of cultural superiority. They are dressed in fine chitons, their hair garlanded with myrtle wreaths. Slaves, both male and female, move silently, undefficiently, filling cups, clearing away the remnants of the dinner course, and preparing for the main event. The drinking, the dinner part, the diapinon, was just the prelude. Now the real symposium begins. A slave brings in a large, ornate mixing bowl, the quater. This is crucial. The Greeks almost never drank their wine neat. To do so was considered barbaric, a path to uncontrolled drunkenness rather than enlightened intoxication. The wine is mixed with water, and the symposia RCH, or master of the drinking, is chosen. HES, like the designated the giant bartender for the evening, deciding the ratio of wine to water. A strong mix for a wild night, a weaker one for more serious discussion, and setting the number of cups each guest must drink. The first libation is poured, a splash of wine on the floor as an offering to the gods, accompanied by a hymn. Then, the drinking begins in earnest, and with the wine, the atmosphere loosens. The conversation, which might have started with politics or business, begins to drift. One man recites a passage from Homer. Another poses a philosophical riddle. A third starts a game of caught a boss, which involves flinging the last dregs of wine from your cup at a target across the room. It's a messy, skillful, and very popular pastime. And then, the entertainment arrives. The door opens, and a group of young women enters. These are not the respectable wives or daughters of your host or his guests. These are hired professionals, flute girls, olet rides, dancers, and acrobats. One begins to play a haunting melody on her double-piped flute, the oros. It's a reedy sound filling the room. Another begins a slow, sinuous dance, her movements both graceful and provocative. Their presence immediately changes the dynamic in the room. The men's gazes become more focused, their comments more pointed, their laughter louder. You watch as one of the guests calls a flute girl over to his couch. He whispers something in her ear, and she laughs. He pulls her down to sit beside him, feeding her a honey cake. The interaction is playful, turbulent, and entirely transcational. Everyone in the room knows she is being paid for her time, for her music, and for the pleasure of her company. Her skill as a musician is a key part of her appeal, but it's intertwined with her physical attractiveness. She is both artist and object. Her performance a prelude to potential, more intimate services later in the evening. Here's a small, fascinating detail from the visual record. The races that depict these scenes. Often, you'll see the men at these parties are bearded and mature, while the entertainers, both male and female, are depicted as young, smooth-skinned, and in their physical prime. The agent power dynamic is visually encoded into the art. It's a clear depiction of who holds the power and who is providing the pleasure. As the night wears on and the wine flows more freely, the philosophical discussions and poetic recitations begin to blur with more earthly pursuits. The gaze of the men isn't just on the female entertainers. You notice the wine pourers, who are often handsome young male slaves. A guest might caress the arm of the boy pouring his wine, offering a compliment that lingers in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. The room becomes a complex web of gazes, a marketplace of attention where status, wit, and wealth are used to bid for the companionship and favor of the beautiful young people in the room, whether they are hired female professionals or enslaved boys. Historians are still debating the exact nature of what happened at these parties. Were they primarily intellectual gatherings that sometimes got a bit rowdy, as Plato's Symposium might suggest? Or were they essentially high-class stag parties where the philosophy was just a thin veneer over a night of drunken debauchery? The answer, most likely, is that it depended entirely on the host and the guests. A symposium could be a forum for the highest forms of intellectual expression, or it could be a chaotic, messy affair. Tonight, it feels like something in between. You hear a heated argument about the meaning of justice from one couch, while from another, you hear drunken singing and laughter as a guest clumsily tries to dance with one of the hired performers. You see philosophy and flirtation, poetry and propositions, all happening in the same small room. The symposium is a microcosm of Athenian society itself, a space where the highest ideals of the mind are celebrated alongside the most basic desires of the body, all fueled by wine and governed by a strict, unspoken set of rules about who is in control and who is there to be controlled. You take another sip of the watered-down wine, feeling the warmth spread through you, a temporary citizen of this intoxicating, contradictory world. As the symposium progresses and the wine continues to flow, you start to notice a particular dynamic playing out, one that seems to go beyond simple flirtation or drunken advances. It's a specific, codified relationship, And it's happening right there on the couches. You see an older man, maybe in his 30s or 40s, deep in conversation with a youth who can't be more than 17 or 18. The boy is not a slave or a hired entertainer. He as a citizen, the son of another respected Athenian. He as what they call an Euromenos, the beloved. The older man is his Aristes, the lover. This isn't a hidden affair. It's a public, socially recognized institution. The boy isn't reclining like the older man. He is sitting upright on the edge of the couch, a posture of respect. He listens intently as his Aristes speaks, instructing him on matters of politics, ethics, and philosophy. The older man, in turn, isn't just whispering sweet nothings. He is acting as a mentor, guiding the youth through the complexities of what it means to be an Athenian citizen. He is supposed to be teaching him merit, or excellence in virtue. On the surface, it's an educational relationship. The older man, established in society, takes a promising youth under his wing. He introduces him at symposia like this one, helps him navigate the treacherous waters of the Agora, and prepares him for his future role as a leader in the city. In exchange for this mentorship and the social access it provides, the youth offers his beauty, his admiration, and his companionship. It's framed as a noble pursuit, a way to channel erotic desire towards a higher purpose, the cultivation of a good citizen. You look around the room and see several such pairs. The language they use is one of idealized love. The Aristes is meant to be captivated not just by the boy's physical beauty, though that is certainly the initial draw, but by his burgeoning intellect and noble character. He is supposed to be a role model, demonstrating self-control, wisdom, and courage. The relationship was thought to be beneficial for the city-state itself, creating bonds of loyalty and affection between generations of citizens, bonds that would translate to solidarity on the battlefield. An entire elite unit of the Theban army, the Sacred Band of Thebes, was famously composed of 150 pairs of these lovers, who were believed to fight more fiercely to protect their partners. But as you observe more closely, you see the cracks in this idealized facade. The admiration from the Aristes can look a lot like possessiveness. His guidance can feel like control. The boy, for his part, is expected to be modest and reserved. He isn't supposed to enjoy the physical aspects of the relationship too much. To do so would be unmanly. His role is to be pursued, to yield reluctantly to the advances of a worthy suitor, not to be an active or enthusiastic participant. His value lies in his youthful beauty, a fleeting commodity that will disappear once his first beard begins to grow. Here's a peculiar aspect of this tradition. The courting process was highly ritualized. The Aristes couldn't just approach any boy he fancied. He had to prove his worthiness, often by petitioning the boy's father or male guardian. He would wait outside the boy's house, write love poems, and present him with socially approved gifts. These gifts were not random. They were typically things associated with the pursuits of an aristocratic man: a fine horse, a hunting dog, or a military spear. The gift was symbolic, a sign that the Aristes intended to guide the boy into the world of men. But let's be blunt, it was also a transaction. The whole institution is a minefield of social anxieties. The Aristes fears rejection, which would be a public humiliation. He also fears being seen as someone driven purely by lust, lacking the self-control so prized by the Greeks. He has to perform the role of the noble mentor perfectly. The Euromenos and his family, on the other hand, have to be careful to choose a suitor who will bring honor, not shame, to their house. Accepting an unworthy or base lover could ruin the boy's reputation for life. And this brings us to the great, unresolved debate that still rages among classicists. Was this practice a beautiful form of mentorship that occasionally involved physical intimacy, a platonic love in the truest sense? Or was it a system of institutionalized exploitation, where powerful older men used their status and wealth to gain sexual access to vulnerable adolescents? The truth, as is so often the case, is probably messy and lies somewhere in the murky middle. It was likely both, and everything in between, depending on the individuals involved. For some pairs, it may have been a genuinely affectionate and educational bond. For others, it was almost certainly a cover for exploitation, a power dynamic thinly veiled in philosophical rhetoric. You look back at the pair on the couch. The older man is now teaching the boy a drinking song. The boy's face is a mixture of concentration and a slight, nervous smile. He is performing his role, just as the Aristes is performing his. The entire symposium is a stage, and this relationship is one of the central plays being performed. It's a relationship built on a complex and, to your modern eyes, deeply uncomfortable mixture of love, mentorship, desire, and power. And you realize that in Athens, even the most intimate connections are a matter of public performance and social negotiation. Let's flip the perspective. For a moment, you are no longer the outside observer. You are the Eromenos. You are 16 years old, and your life has recently become very complicated. You walk through the agora, and you feel the weight of eyes on you. It's a strange and unsettling new reality. Just a year ago, you were a child, playing games with your friends. Now, you are on the cusp of manhood, and your body has become a subject of public conversation. Your burgeoning athletic physique, honed in the Pola Estra, the wrestling school, is suddenly a currency you didn't know you possessed. Your day is structured around the pursuits of a young aristocratic Athenian. In the morning, you might attend lessons with a rhetorician, learning the art of public speaking. In the afternoon, you go to the gymnasium. This isn't just about physical fitness. The gymnasium is the primary social stage for youths like you. It's where you exercise, bathe, and socialize, all under the scrutinizing gaze of the city's older men, the Aristai, who gather there specifically to watch and select potential favorites. They sit on the stone benches, ostensibly discussing politics, but their eyes follow every movement as you run, throw the discus, or practice wrestling with your peers. You are acutely aware of the attention. You have to move with a certain grace, a practiced nonchalance. You must appear modest and virtuous, what they call edoes. This means keeping your eyes downcast, not laughing too loudly, and never, ever seeming eager for the attention you are receiving. Your reputation is paramount, to be seen as vain, promiscuous, or, worst of all, effeminate, or be disastrous. It could damage not just your own future prospects, but your entire family's standing. The pressure to be the perfect object of desire is immense. And then, there are the suitors. They come to your father's house. They are prominent men. Men you've seen giving speeches in the assembly or leading processions during religious festivals. They bring gifts. Last week, a general named Lycomdes brought a magnificent hunting spear, its shaft made of polished ash wood. Yesterday, a wealthy landowner, Cleon, sent over a rooster. This is a very common, almost cliché gift for a suitor to give an Eromenos. Roosters were seen as symbols of virility and fighting spirit. A strange but potent piece of courtship language. Your father receives these men and their gifts, and you stand by his side, silent and deferential, while your future is being negotiated. You don't have much say in the matter. The choice of an Aristes is a family decision. Your father and uncles will weigh the offers. Who can provide the best connections? Who will be the most effective mentor? Who has the best reputation for honor and self-restraint? It's a strategic alliance, and your role is to be the beautiful, passive link that seals it. You might have a preference, of course. Perhaps you admire one man's military record or an other's poetic skill, but your personal feelings are secondary to the family's interests. Once a suitor is accepted, the relationship begins. He accompanies you in public, a visible sign of his patronage. He takes you to your first symposia. This is both exciting and terrifying. You are suddenly in the company of the city's most powerful men, expected to listen intelligently, but not to speak out of turn. You are, on display, a testament to your Aristes' good taste. He points out important figures, explains the nuances of a political debate, and critiques a poetry reading. It is an education, but it's an education where you are also the exhibit. The physical side of the relationship is a landscape of unspoken rules and anxieties. The ideal is peddled by the moralists. was that the physical intimacy should be limited and chaste. The Aristes was supposed to desire your soul, not just your body. But you know what people whisper. You know that the reality is often far different. The expectation is that you will grant your favor, but you must do so with reluctance. You are not supposed to find pleasure in it. That would make you like a woman, or worse, like a prostitute. The lines are incredibly fine and terrifyingly easy to cross. The historical evidence for this is fascinating. Courtroom speeches from the era show how rivals would try to discredit a man by claiming that, as a youth, he had been a prom isquasiromanos, that he had enjoyed the submissive role too much, thereby forfeiting his claim to be a dominant, masculine citizen. The entire system, you realize, is a performance. You are performing the role of the modest, beautiful youth. Your Aristes is performing the role of the wise, self-controlled mentor. Your family is performing its role as the guardian of your virtue, and the whole city is the audience. Historians have long argued over the agency of the Euromenes. Was he purely a pawn in the games of older men, or did he wield a subtle power of his own? The power to grant or withhold his favor, to manipulate his suitors, and to leverage his youthful appeal for his own future advancement. The answer is likely that it varied enormously. Some boys were undoubtedly victims, trapped and exploited. Others may have been savvy players, fully aware of the game and skilled at playing it to their advantage. But as you lie on your bed at night, you feel the weight of it all. You are at the center of a system that worships your youth, but also seeks to control it. You are desired, but you are not free. You are being educated for a future of power, but your present is defined by your powerlessness, and you know, with a certainty that is both a comfort and a terror, that it will all end the moment the first shadow of a beard appears on your chin. The courting ritual is in full swing, and as the potential Euromenos, you are on the receiving end of a very particular kind of generosity. But, let's be clear, in Athens, a gift is never just a gift. Every present is loaded with meaning, a token in a complex negotiation of status, desire, and obligation. The gifts your suitors bring are not just expressions of affection. They are carefully chosen instruments in a public performance of courtship. Your Aristes, the one your family has finally approved, doesn't just give you trinkets. The gifts are specific and socially significant, designed to signal his intentions and his worth. They fall into categories that mirror the life he is supposedly preparing you for. First, there are the gifts of the gymnasium and the hunt. He might give you a beautifully crafted discus, an oil flask carry ball Louis for scraping off sweat and dust after exercise, or a fine javelin. These aren't just sporting goods. They are tools that associate you with the aristocratic male world of physical prowess and martial readiness. When he gives you a hunting dog, HES not just giving you a pet, HES initiating you into the elite pastime of the hunt, a key part of an aristocratic man's education. Then, there are the more directly martial gifts. A spear, a shield, perhaps even a helmet. These are the most prestigious gifts of all. They are a powerful statement, linking his affection for you directly to the ultimate duty of a citizen, defending the polis. By giving you arms, he is symbolically recognizing you as a future warrior and his partner in that civic duty. It elevates the relationship, framing it in terms of honor and patriotism. It's a way of saying, my love for you is not a private weakness. It is a public virtue that strengthens the city. But let's strip away the high-minded rhetoric for a moment. What is really happening here? You, the youth, have something he wants. Your beauty, your companionship, the prestige of being seen with you. Too, the older man, has something you and your family want. Status, connections, mentorship, and wealth. The gifts are the medium of exchange. They bridge the gap between his desire and your socially mandated reluctance. I find gift demonstrates his seriousness and his financial ability to be a proper patron. It makes it easier for you and your family to accept his suit without looking cheap or dishonorable. The transaction becomes even clearer when you consider the less savory side of things. Not all relationships were this high-minded. The lines could blur very easily. What's the difference between an honorable Aristes giving his beloved a spear and a wealthy man simply paying for the company of a beautiful youth from a poorer family. The distinction, in practice, could be razor thin, and it was a source of great anxiety for the Athenians themselves. They obsessed over this difference. In law courts, a man's political opponent might accuse him of having, in his youth, accepted money for his favors. This was a devastating accusation. To receive a gift, like a horse, was honorable. To receive a cash payment was to be a prostitute, a pornos. The object itself carried the moral weight, and here is a quirky, controversial bit of evidence that scholars still argue about. On some Athenian vases, we see scenes of courtship where the heiress is presenting the Eromenos with a money bag. This is puzzling and flies in the face of the official ideology. Are these scenes meant to be satirical, a critique of relationships that have devolved into pure commerce? Or are they a realistic, if perhaps slightly shameful, depiction of what actually happened? Some historians argue that even within honorable relationships, direct financial support might have been common, especially if the youth's family was not wealthy. The expensive gifts were, in effect, a way to launder what was essentially a payment, wrapping the wrought transaction in a more acceptable, symbolic package. The value of the gift mattered. Hey Lord, the more impressive the gift, the more honor it brought to both the giver and the receiver. It showed the Erastes was a man of means on serious intent, and it showed the Eromenos was worthy of such a prestigious suitor. The entire city was watching. If a prominent man was known to be courting a particular youth, everyone would be waiting to see what gifts were exchanged. It was a form of social theater. The gift was the prop that made the whole play believable. So, when your Erastes presents you with a magnificent, high-strung Thessalian horse, you understand all the layers of meaning. On the surface, it's a tool for you to ride to the gymnasium, to join the cavalry, to become a proper Athenian nobleman. Beneath that, it's a public declaration of your worth and his status. And beneath that still, it is the price of admission. It's the down payment on a relationship that is meant to benefit you both, but one where the terms are set by the man holding the reins. The horse is beautiful, powerful, and a symbol of your future. It is also the most elegant, expensive, and socially acceptable IOU you will ever receive. You are expected to show your gratitude, and in this world, gratitude has a very specific and very physical form of expression. Let's leave the rarefied air of the aristocratic symposium and the complex theater of pederasty. Let's walk down to the Care, Amicos district. By day, it's the potter's quarter, dusty and loud with the sound of spinning wheels and firing kilns. But as dusk falls, a different kind of commerce begins to stir. This area, along with the port of Piraeus, is the heart of Athens' red light district. This is where desire is stripped of all its philosophical and educational pretenses. Here, it is a straightforward, no-frills commodity. Welcome to the world of the Athenian brothel, the Pornian. You won't find these places marked with flashing red lights, but they are easy enough to spot. They are typically small, squalid, multi-roomed buildings, oft unlocated in the narrowest, darkest alleyways. The only advertisement might be a phallus carved into the stone above the door, or a simple sign. The atmosphere is nothing like the elegant and drawn of the wealthy. The air is thick with the smell of cheap oil lamps, stale wine, sweat, and a kind of weary desperation. The rooms are tiny, containing little more than a simple wooden bed with a straw mattress. As you step inside one, your eyes adjust to the dim light. The women here are the pornei, the plural of porni. This is the root of our modern word pornography. They are, for the most in part, not Athenian citizens. Many are slaves, bought and sold specifically for this purpose. Others might be foreign women who have fallen on hard times, or perhaps abandoned citizen children who were raised into the trade. They have no rights, no social standing, and very little hope of ever leaving this life. They are property, owned by a brothel keeper, the pornobos, who takes almost all of their earnings. The transaction is brutally simple. A man comes in, chooses a woman, pays the brothel keeper, and is led to a small chamber. There is no pretense of conversation, no poetry, no mentorship. It is a purely physical service, bought and paid for. and it was cheap. This was the democratic end of the desire market, accessible to almost any free man who could scrape together a few coins. Sailors fresh off the boat, young men without the means to court an Eromenos, even poor farmers in the city for the day. This is where you might encounter one of the most fascinating and telling artifacts of this world, the spin tria. These are not actually Athenian but Roman, yet they illustrate a practice that was likely widespread. They were small bronze or brass tokens, almost like coins. On one side, they depicted an explicit sexual act. On the other side, a number. Historians still debate their exact function. Were they brothel tokens? A way for a customer who didn't speak the local language to clearly indicate what service he wanted to buy. Were they game pieces for some kind of erotic board game? Or were they simply locker tokens for the public baths that happened to have racy designs? The prevailing theory is that they were a form of payment or voucher within the brothel, a way to handle the transaction without using official state currency inside the establishment. Imagine a customer buying a handful of these tokens from the brothel keeper, then spending them with the women. It's the ultimate commodification of intimacy. Desire turned into a token, as impersonal as a ticket for a ride. The lives of the women in these places were grim. They were often unmarked by their profession. Some sources suggest that pornei were required to wear specific, colorful clothing to distinguish them from respectable women, and perhaps even to dye their hair a certain color, like blonde or red, using harsh chemicals. This is another one of those points that academics argue about, whether this was a legal requirement or just a common practice. Either way, they were visually set apart, branded by their trade. They were subject to the whims of their owners and their clients, with no legal recourse against abuse. And yet, even in this bleak environment, you can find traces of humanity. Archaeologists excavating what are believed to be ancient brothels have found personal items, small pieces of jewelry, loom weights suggesting they wove to pass the time, and feeding cups for infants. These women were not just anonymous bodies. They were individuals who lived, and perhaps even loved and raised children, within these oppressive walls. They had names, though often professional names given to them by their owners. Names like Lioness, Bay, or Gazelle. You stand in the shadows of the Keramikoes, watching men slip in and out of the doorways. There's a stark difference between this scene and the symposium. There, desire was wrapped in layers of poetry, philosophy, and social ritual. Here, it is a raw, unadorned product. The existence of these brothels was seen by many Athenians as a social necessity. They provided an outlet for male sexual desire that protected the respectable women of the citizen class from unwanted advances. It was a pressure valve for the city, a way of containing and channeling a force that was seen as potentially disruptive. The comfort and safety of the women in the Orkos was, in a way, built upon the exploitation of the women in the Porneian. One world could not exist without the other. This is the uncomfortable, unspoken foundation of the city's sexual economy. Let's stay here for a while, in the dim, smoky light of the Care, Amica West brothel, but this time, you won't be a customer or a casual observer. You will see this world through the eyes of a pornei. Let's call you Lyra. It's not your real name. Of course, your real name was lost long ago. Maybe when you were captured in a war in Thrace, or perhaps when your impoverished family sold you as a child. Your owner, a stout, sour-faced man named P.H. Renault, gave you the name Lyra. He thought it sounded musical, which he believed was good for business. You don't play the lyre. Your day doesn't have a beginning or an end in the way other people's do. It's a cycle of brief, anonymous encounters, punctuated by long stretches of waiting. You share a small, stuffy room with two other women. There's a constant smell of unwashed bodies and cheap, rancid olive oil. Your only possessions are a thin mattress, a spare, coarse tunic, and a small, cracked mirror that P.H. Renault lets you use because he says a sad face doesn't sell. Your body is not your own. It is a tool for his profit. You have no say in who your clients are, what they demand, or how many you must see in a single night. You are, in the eyes of Athenian law, a living tool, An M-psych on organ, no different from a hammer or a plow. If a client harms you, it is PH Rain OS who might sue for damages to his property, not you for the injury to your person. Your customers are a river of nameless faces. Young men, awkward and rough, reeking of the cheap wine they drank for courage. Older, married men seeking something their respectable wives cannot provide. Foreign sailors, their skin weathered by the sea, who spend their shore leave pay in a few frantic hours. They rarely speak your language. They don't ask your name. They look at you, but they don't see you. To them, you are not a person. You are a service. You have learned to dissociate, to retreat into a quiet, protected space in your mind while your body goes through the motions. It's a survival mechanism. Here's a small, poignant detail of your existence. Makeup. PH Rain OS insists you wear it. He provides you with a pot of Methionine, a white lid-based powder, to whiten your face. This was considered fashionable, but it's also a poison, slowly seeping into your skin. You use a touch of Incos, a red ochre paste, for your cheeks and lips. It's a mask you put on, not to make yourself beautiful, but to make yourself into the product he is selling. The face in the mirror is not your own. It belongs to Lyra, the commodity. The other women are your only real family. You share food when you can, scraps from the nearby market. You warn each other about particularly cruel or dangerous clients. You share stories from your past lives in hushed whispers late at night. There is a bond forged in shared misery, a fragile solidarity in a world that is designed to isolate and break you. But there is also rivalry, stoked by PH Renault, who will reward the woman who earns the most with a slightly better meal or a rare moment of rest. He pits you against each other to maximize his profits. You have no freedom of movement. You are not allowed to leave the brothel except on rare occasions, and always under escort. You see the world of Athens, the bustling agora, the grand processions, only from a distance. Like a dream, you see respectable citizen women, veiled and escorted by their slaves, and you feel a gulf as wide as the Aegean Sea between your life and theirs. They are protected by the very system that condemns you. Their chastity is the city's pride. Your lack of it is the city's necessary shame. Historians continue to debate the nuances of this life. Were there any avenues for a porny to escape? It was incredibly rare, but not entirely impossible. A client might develop a genuine affection for a woman and buy her freedom, setting her up as his mistress. It was the dream you all clung to, a flicker of hope in the darkness. More likely, freedom came only with age, when your body was no longer considered valuable. But even then, a freed prostitute had no family, no skills beyond her former trade, and no place in respectable society. Freedom could be just another form of destitution. One evening, a client, a young soldier, presses a small clay lamp into your hand after he pays PH Renault. It's not part of the payment. It's a gift. It's crudely made, but on its side is a small, hastily scratched drawing of a dolphin. He says nothing, just looks you in the eye for a second longer than anyone else has, and then he is gone. You hide the lamp under your mattress. It's a worthless object. It's a dangerous object if PH Renault finds it. But it's the first thing someone has given you, not the brothel, in years. It's a flicker of recognition, a sign that for one brief moment, someone saw a person instead of a product, in the crushing anonymity of your daily existence. This small, useless lamp is a treasure beyond price. It's a reminder that beneath the lead powder in the professional name, a human being still exists. The price of desire in Athens is not a mystery. It's a well-documented fact, spoken of as openly as the price of barley. And at the bottom of this market, in the brothels of Karamikos, where you, as Lyra, worked, the price is famously, almost legendarily, though the standard fee for the most basic service, the one that gives your profession its name, is just 2 obols. Let's put that in perspective. An obol is a tiny silver coin, the smallest denomination of Athenian currency. 6 obols make 1 drachma. For a long time, 1 drachma was the standard day's wage for a skilled laborer, or a juryman in the Athenian courts. So, For 1/3 of a day's pay, a man could purchase a few moments of physical release. This was a luxury. It was an affordable, everyday expense for a huge portion of the male population. It was cheaper than a good pair of sandals, probably about the same price as a decent meal with a cup of wine at a local tavern. This price point is everything. It makes the service accessible, almost democratic. It means that the sexual gratification of the male citizen or resident foreigner is not a privilege of the rich but a basic staple, as readily available as bread. This low price reinforces your status as a commodity. You are not a skilled artisan or a provider of a unique experience. You are a bulk good, sold cheaply and in high volume. Your owner, P.H. Renault, makes his profit not from high margins, but from sheer turnover. He needs you and the other women to see as many clients as possible each night to make the business worthwhile. The transaction itself is brutally efficient. A man walks in. He hands the 2 bowls not to you, but to P.H. Renault. The money is the key that unlocks the door to your room. You never touch the coins. You are the product, not the vendor. You might not even know for sure how much a client has paid. P.H. Renault might charge more for a client who wants more of your time, or for a specific request, but that extra profit goes directly into his purse. You receive none of it. Your payment is a roof over your head and enough food to keep you alive and working. Here's a fascinating, if slightly stomach-turning, tidbit about ancient currency. While the 2 bowl price is widely cited in ancient comedies and speeches, the physical handling of money itself was a dirty business. Coins were passed through countless hands, used for every imaginable transaction, and were far from clean. The idea of exchanging this grubby currency directly for an act of intimacy adds another layer of grim reality to the whole process. There was no romance here, just a grimy, real-world exchange. Some scholars speculate this is another reason white opens, like the spin triae we mentioned earlier, might have been used to create a thin barrier of abstraction between the filth of the marketplace and the physical act itself. It's a way of mentally laundering the transaction, even if just slightly. This fixed, low price also had a profound social function. It starkly differentiated you, the porny, from every other class of woman. A respectable wife had infinite value. As the mother of legitimate heirs, her worth could be quantified in coins. A high-class courtesy, a hetair, could command enormous sums, her price fluctuating based on her beauty, wit, and exclusivity. But you, the porny, had a set menu price. You were the bottom rung, the baseline against which all other female worth was measured. The phrase to obal piece could be used as a derogatory slang term for a woman of low morals. Your price defined your identity in the eyes of the city. This leads to a point of contention among historians. Did the women ever get to keep any of the money? The traditional view is no, absolutely not, especially if they were slaves. The master took everything. However, some revisionist historians argue that a brothel owner might have allowed a particularly popular or reliable woman to keep a tiny fraction of her earnings, perhaps as an incentive to work harder or to prevent her from running away. It wouldn't have been much, maybe a single low ball out of every 10 she earned. It's a bleak thought, the idea of saving up, oboe by oboe, over years of service, for a freedom that might never come. It's a vision of hope so small it's almost cruel. As you lie on your mattress, you hear the clink of coins outside your door again and again. 2 oboes clink, a man's heavy footsteps. A few minutes of his time, then the footsteps leaving. 2 oboes clink, another one. The sound is the rhythm of your life. It's the sound of your body being sold, piece by piece, for the smallest, most common of coins. Each clink is a reminder of your worth in the city. Less than a potter's vase, more than a loaf of bread. You are a human being, reduced to the price of a cheap convenience. You might think that a business as sordid and marginalized as the brothel, where you work, would exist in the shadows, outside the notice of the respectable Athenian state. You would be wrong. The city of Athens, for all its philosophical grandeur, was run on intensely practical and sentimental principles. And that meant one thing above all: if it moves, tax it. The desire business was no exception. Your owner, Th. Renos, grumbles about it constantly. It's called the pornikantelos, the prostitute tax. It was a tax levied directly on brothel keepers like him, based on their income. This wasn't some under-the-table shakedown. It was an official, state-sanctioned tax, collected by magistrates. The state, in its infinite pragmatism, recognized that a vast amount of money was changing hands in the city as brothels, taverns, and rented rooms, and they wanted their cut. This single fact is profound. By taxing the trade, the state officially acknowledged its existence and, in a way, legitimized it as a part of the city's economy. It wasn't an illegal, underground activity to be stamped out. It was a recognized, if low status, commercial enterprise. The government of Pericles and Demosthenes was, in part, funded by the profits of your exploitation, the wages for the jurymen who sat in judgment, the funds to build the magnificent temples on the Acropolis, the money to maintain the powerful Athenian fleet. A tiny fraction of all that came from the tax on the 2 ruble transactions happening in your small, dark room. The existence of this tax created a strange paradox. On one hand, society looked down on Th. Renos, the pornoboscoes. He was seen as a contemptible figure, profiting from the shame of others. He couldn't hold public office or speak in the assembly. His profession legally barred him from the rights of a full citizen. And yet, he was also a taxpayer, a contributor to the city's coffers. He was both a social outcast and a part of the state's financial machinery. Here's a peculiar little side effect of this system that historians find fascinating. Because the tax was based on income, the state needed some way to track it. This implies that brothel keepers had to keep ledgers, account books detailing their earnings. Imagine that for a moment. Th. Renos, sitting at his small wooden table, dipping a reed pen into ink, meticulously recording the number of clients you and the other women served each night. A grim accounting of human bodies, tallied up like sacks of grain or jars of wine, all for the benefit of the tax collector. These records, of course, have not survived, but their necessary existence gives us a chilling glimpse into the cold, bureaucratic nature of this business. The state's involvement didn't stop at taxation. They also, to some degree, regulated it. Some sources suggest that Solon, the great Athenian lawgiver of the 6th century BC, was the one who first established state-run brothels. The historicity of this is hotly debated. Did the state of Athens actually own and operate its own houses of prostitution? The idea, as told by later writers, was that Solon did this to democratize sexual access and protect respectable women by providing an affordable, state-controlled outlet for young men's desires. The story goes that he purchased female slaves and set them up in houses where the price was fixed at 1 obol, even cheaper than the later standard. Whether this is true or just a legend attributed to the famous lawgiver, it reveals a core Athenian belief. That male desire was a powerful, natural force that needed to be managed and channeled by the state for the good of the community. It wasn't a moral failing to be repressed. It was a public utility to be regulated, like the water supply or the grain market. By controlling the supply and price, the state could ensure social stability. It's a level of pragmatism that can feel jarring to modern sensibilities. There was no moral panic, no campaign to clean up the streets. There was just a calm, rational decision to regulate and tax a lucrative market. So, as you lie there, you are not just a slave owned by Th. Renos. You are, in a very real sense, an unaccountable and unwilling employee of the Athenian state. You are a tiny cog in the great economic machine of the polis. The money Th. Renos collects from your clients flows upwards, a portion of it becoming the pornikantelos, which then funds the very civilization that holds you in contempt. Your body generates revenue that helps pay for the speeches about liberty and democracy being given in the agora, a liberty and democracy you will never know. It is perhaps the most profound and bitter irony of your existence. You are at the absolute bottom of this society, and yet you are helping to hold it up. Let's leave the stench and desperation of the Karamikos behind. Let's walk up both literally and socially. You've received another, much more exclusive invitation. This time, it's to the home of a wealthy Athenian, but not for a rowdy symposium. It's for a more intimate gathering, and the main attraction is not a flute girl or a dancer, but a hetaira. The word itself is difficult to translate. Courtsane is the closest we have, but it doesn't quite capture the complexity. She is not a porny, she is not a common prostitute. She is in a different universe entirely. The house is in a fashionable part of Athens. The rooms are larger, the furnishings more elegant. The guests are a select group, a famous playwright, a visiting politician from a rival city-state, a couple of young, wealthy aristocrats. They are here for an evening of sparkling conversation, and the person orchestrating it is the hetaira. Let's call her Dice. When Dice enters the room, the shift in atmosphere is immediate. She is stunningly beautiful, of course, but it's more than that. She carries herself with an intellectual confidence and social grace that you have not seen in any other woman in Athens. She is not veiled or hidden away. She looks the men directly in the eye, something a respectable citizen wife would never do. She reclines on a couch, just as the men do, a privilege denied to the hired entertainers at the symposium. She is not just present at the party, she is the center of it. She begins to speak, and her conversation is dazzling. She can debate the latest play by Euripides with the playwright, discuss military strategy with the politician, and trade witty philosophical banter with the young aristocrats. She is educated, articulate, and charming, unlike the citizen wife who is confined to the home and kept in deliberate ignorance of worldly affairs. The hetaira has made knowledge her primary tool. She has cultivated her mind as meticulously as she has her body. This is her unique selling proposition. Men seek out a hetaira not just for physical intimacy, but for a kind of companionship that their own society denies them elsewhere. Their wives are for producing heirs. The boys they court are for education and prestige. The pornei are for crude physical release. But the hetaira offers something different, the company of an intelligent, engaging, and worldly female peer. She can be a friend, a confidant, an intellectual sparring partner, and a lover, all rolled into one. She fills a void in the social and emotional lives of Athenian men that was created by the very structure of their society. Of course, this all comes at a staggering price. While a pornée costs 2 obols, an evening with a hetaira like Dice could cost thousands of drachmas. She might be paid with extravagant gifts, a house, fine jewelry, imported silks, or a team of slaves. Only the wealthiest men in Athens could afford her company. Her high price is part of her allure. It makes her exclusive, a status symbol. To be the patron of a famous hetaira was a sign of immense wealth and sophistication. Here's a quirky detail that illustrates their unique status. Famous hetaira were public figures. Their names were known throughout the Greek world. They were, in a way, the first celebrities. People gossiped about them, poets wrote about them, and vase painters depicted them, while a citizen wife's name was never to be spoken in public. A hetaira's name could be on every owner's lips. Her fame was her brand. She was an independent contractor in the business of desire, and her reputation was her most valuable asset. But let's not romanticize this too much. The life of a hetaira was precarious. Most were non-citizens, often from other Greek cities like Corinth or Miletus, which had a reputation for producing sophisticated courtesans. This meant they had no legal rights in Athens. They were entirely dependent on the generosity of their patrons. A patron could drop her at any moment, leaving her destitute. She had to be constantly charming, constantly beautiful, constantly interesting. To maintain her position, it was a life of performance. Every single day, historians are still debating the precise social standing of these women. Were they respected artists and intellectuals who happened to engage in sex work? Or were they just very expensive prostitutes with a brilliant marketing strategy? The Athenians themselves seem to have been ambivalent. They admired their beauty and wit, but also viewed them with suspicion. A hetaira was a woman who lived by a man's rules, but outside of a man's control. She was independent, intelligent, and sexually autonomous, all qualities that were seen as dangerous in a woman. You watched eyes as she gracefully deflects a clumsy compliment from one of the young men and turns it into a joke that makes the whole room laugh. She is in complete command of the situation. She is selling an illusion. The illusion of being a man's equal in a world built on female subjugation. It is a brilliant, dazzling, and incredibly lucrative illusion. But you can't help but wonder what happens when the party is over. When the wealthy patrons go home to their respectable wives, what is left for the Hitayera but the constant, gnawing pressure to keep the illusion alive for one more night? How does a woman become Thais? How does one ascend from the anonymous masses to become a celebrated Hitayera? It's not simply a matter of being born beautiful. Beauty, the ticket, the prerequisite, but the real work. The thing that separates a common court scene from a legendary one is education. For a Hitayera, knowledge isn't a luxury. It's a weapon and to love the trade. Her mind is her primary asset, and she cultivates it with the dedication of an Olympic athlete training for the games. Let's imagine the curriculum of a young Hitayera in training. She would have been identified early, perhaps as a promising young slave in a wealthy household, or as the daughter of an established Hitayera who is training her successor. Her education would begin long before that of her male counterparts. While a young Athenian boy is learning basic letters, she is being immersed in the high culture of the Greek world. First and foremost, there is music. She must master the lyre, the elegant stringed instrument of poets and aristocrats. Its music is the sound of sophistication. She must also learn the aulos, the double-piped flute, though this is a slightly lower status instrument, more associated with the wilder energy of the symposium. She needs to be able to play both, to set the mood for any occasion. From a contemplative evening of poetry to a drunken party, she must also learn to sing, to memorize and perform the works of the great lyric poets like Sappho and Creon, whose verses speak of love, desire, and the bitterness of heartbreak. Then comes literature and rhetoric. She must be able to recite long passages of Homer from memory, to understand the plots of the latest tragedies by Sophocles and Euripides, and to have a witty opinion on the comedies of Aristophanes. She needs to be well versed enough to hold her own in a conversation with the city's greatest minds. This isn't just about being entertaining. It's about understanding the cultural language of the elite men who will be her clients. She needs to get their jokes, understand their references, and contribute to their discussions in a way that makes her seem like a peer, not just a pretty ornament. Philosophy is on the syllabus too. She might not be a deep philosophical thinker in her own right, but she needs to know the basics. She needs to understand the difference between Socrates' method of questioning and the sophist's art of persuasion. When a patron starts talking about Plato's theory of forms, she needs to be able to nod intelligently and ask a pertinent question, not just stare blankly. This intellectual agility is key to her appeal. Here's a small, telling detail about this education. It was entirely practical and performance-oriented, unlike a young man's education, which was aimed at making him a good citizen and leader. Her education was aimed at making her a desirable companion. She didn't learn mathematics or military strategy for their own sake, but only insofar as they could be used to charm a client. Her knowledge was a carefully curated collection of conversational ammunition. And of course, there is the physical education. This isn't the athletic training of the gymnasium. It's the art of grace. She learns to dance, to move, with a calculated allure. She learns the art of dress, how to use fine fabrics and jewelry to accentuate her beauty. She learns about cosmetics, perfumes, and hairstyles. It is a full-body performance, and every detail must be perfect. She is, in essence, a living work of art, and she is both the artist and the canvas. The existence of these highly educated women creates a fascinating and somewhat controversial question for historians. Were Hetairai the most educated women in ancient Greece? In a formal, academic sense, probably not. There were likely some aristocratic citizen women who received a solid education in private. But in terms of worldly, cultural, and social knowledge, The Hetairae were in a class of their own. They were forced by their profession to be learned. A citizen wife's ignorance could be seen as a sign of her virtue and seclusion. A Hetaira's ignorance would be a sign of her failure. This education is her only security. Her beauty will fade. The generosity of her patrons is notoriously fickle. But her wit, her knowledge, her ability to command a room with her intellect, these are skills that can last. They are what allow her to build a reputation, to attract a long-term patron who might provide for her in her old age, or to accumulate enough wealth to achieve a measure of true independence. She might even run her own salon, training the next generation of Hetairae. So, when you see Thais holding a room captive with a clever analysis of a Homeric passage, you are not just seeing a beautiful woman. You are seeing the product of a decade or more of relentless, focused training. You are seeing a woman who has weaponized culture, who has turned poetry and philosophy into profit. In a society that officially denied women access to the public and intellectual world, she has hacked the system, using the very knowledge prized by men to carve out her own small kingdom of power and influence. In the world of the Hetairae, there is one name that echoes louder than any other, a name that has become almost mythical, Aspasia of Miletus. As you sit in these exclusive Athenian circles, you hear her name spoken with a mixture of awe, admiration, and suspicion. She is not just a Hetaira, she is the Hetaira, the benchmark against which all others are measured. But the story of Aspasia is so extraordinary that it blurs the lines, forcing you to question what it even means to be a Hetaira. Aspasia arrived in Athens in the middle of the 5th century BC, a foreigner from the Greek city of Miletus in Ionia. Miletus had a reputation for being a center of intellectual and artistic ferment, and for producing women who were far more educated and liberated than their Athenian counterparts. Aspasia was the embodiment of this reputation. She was brilliant, and she quickly established a salon that became the white-hot center of Athenian intellectual life. The guest list for her gatherings was a who's who of the Golden Age. Socrates was a regular visitor, and he reportedly claimed to have learned the art of rhetoric from her. The playwright Euripides, the sculptor Phidias, the philosopher Anaxagoras, they all flocked to her home to engage in conversation and debate. She was not just a participant in these discussions. By many accounts, she was a leader, a teacher whose intellectual prowess was sought out by the most powerful men in the city. And then there was her most famous companion, Pericles, the great statesman, the leader of democratic Athens, the man whose name is synonymous with the city's golden age. Pericles fell deeply, scandalously in love with Aspasia. He left his respectable Athenian wife, a move that was almost unheard of, and lived with Aspasia for the rest of his life. He treated her not as a mistress, but as a partner. He discussed matters of state with her, valued her political advice, and showed her a level of public respect that was shocking to conservative Athenians. This is where the mystery begins, and the debate that still rages among historians. Who was Aspasia? Really, the sources are contradictory, colored by the biases of the men who wrote them. To her admirers, like Socrates and his followers, she was a brilliant philosopher and rhetorician, a political advisor whose only crime was being a woman of genius in a man's world. They saw her as Pericles' intellectual equal, his true soulmate. But to her detractors, she was something far more sinister. The comic playwrights of the day, who acted as the city's savage social critics, had a field day with her. They portrayed her as a scheming, power-hungry courtesan, a brothel keeper who had bewitched Pericles with her feminine wiles. They accused her of being the puppet master behind his throne, whispering in his ear and manipulating him into disastrous political decisions, even blaming her for starting the Peloponnesian War to serve the interests of her home city, Miletus. In their telling, she was not a philosopher. She was a porny who had hit the ultimate jackpot. Here's a specific, juicy accusation that was thrown at her. Her enemies claimed that the beautiful young women who frequented her house were not students of philosophy, but high-class prostitutes that she was training and procuring for Pericles and his friends. They painted her so not as a hub of intellectualism, but as the most exclusive and politically connected brothel in Athens. This accusation was so potent that Pericles himself had to defend her in court against the charge of impiety and procuring women for his own use. He reportedly broke down in tears while pleading for her, a shocking display of emotion for the famously reserved leader. So which is it? Was she the ancient equivalent of a first lady, an unofficial but influential political advisor? Was she a proto-feminist intellectual, running a school for women? Was she a brilliant but conventional hetaira, who managed to secure the most powerful patron in Greece? Or was she, as her enemies claim, a master manipulator and brothel keeper? The truth is, we will never know for sure. The historical record is too thin, too biased. She left no writings of her own. We only see her through the distorted lens of the men who wrote about her, men who were either her devoted friends or her bitter enemies. She is a historical Rorschach test. What you see in Aspasia often reflects what you want to believe about women, power, and sexuality in the ancient world. The very existence of this debate, however, tells you everything you need to know. Aspasia shattered the rigid categories of Athenian womanhood. She was not a wife, confined to the home. She was not a porny, sold for a few coins. She was not even a typical hetaira, dependent on a string of patrons. She achieved a level of influence and public prominence that was simply not supposed to be possible for a woman, especially a foreign one. She was an anomaly, a phenomenon. Her story is the ultimate testament to the power a woman could wield in this world, but also to the vicious backlash she would face for daring to do so. Aspasia remains an enigma, a puzzle at the very heart of the Golden Age, a testament to the fact that the most powerful forces are often the ones we can never fully define. You've seen the glittering life of a hetaira like Dies, and you've heard the legendary tale of Aspasia. It's easy to be seduced by the image of these women, to see them as beacons of female empowerment in a deeply patriarchal society. They are educated, wealthy, and seemingly independent. They command the attention of powerful men, compared to the silent, secluded wife of the brutalized pornee. Their lives seem like a dream of freedom. But is it really freedom? Or is it just a more comfortable, more gilded cage? Let's look closer at the foundations of the hetaira's life. Her entire existence is built on the approval of men. Her education is tailored to please them. Her beauty is cultivated to attract them. Her wit is sharpened to entertain them. She is a master of her craft, but the craft itself is one of curated appeal. She is, in essence, the ultimate freelancer in a gig economy run by a small, elite group of male clients. This gives her a degree of autonomy, certainly more than other women, but it's a fragile autonomy. Her financial independence is a mirage. Yes, she can accumulate great wealth, but she rarely owns it in the same way a man does. As a non-citizen, a metwagos, she has limited legal rights. She likely cannot own land or property in her own name. Her wealth is often held for her by a male patron or citizen sponsor. This means she is perpetually dependent on his goodwill. If he decides to end the relationship, she could lose everything overnight. Her freedom is a lease, not a deed. She is always just one powerful man's bad mood away from ruin. Consider the physical and emotional toll of her profession. She must always be on. She has to be beautiful every day, witty every night, and charming even when she is tired, sick, or sad. Her body and her mind are her business, and a business cannot afford to have off days. The pressure to remain youthful and desirable in a culture that fetishized youth is immense. What happens when she ages? A few exceptionally successful hetaira, I might, like we said, transition into the role of a madam, training younger women. But for most, aging meant a gradual slide into poverty and obscurity. The freedom of her youth was a short-term loan from a patriarchal society, and the interest rates were brutal. Here's a small, telling detail that highlights her precarious status. The legal system. A hetaira had very little legal protection. While a man who assaulted a citizen woman would face severe penalties, an assault on a hetaira was a much less serious crime. It might be treated as a property dispute with her patron, but she herself had little standing in court. She was a public woman, and in the eyes of the law, that meant she had less right to bodily integrity. Her accessibility was both her livelihood and her greatest vulnerability. This leads to the central paradox of the Hittite era. She is celebrated for her intelligence and independence, but she is also held in contempt for the very same reasons. She operates outside the respectable framework of the oikos, the family unit. This makes her dangerous. Orators in court would often use a man's association with the Hittite era to slander his character, portraying him as being under the influence of a manipulative, untrustworthy woman. She is a convenient scapegoat, a symbol of the corrupting influence of female power that is not tied to the production of legitimate heirs. And this is where historians are still trying to read between the lines. Did these women form their own communities? Did they create support networks to protect themselves in this precarious world? We have hints of it. We know of Hittite who were mothers and daughters, suggesting a trade passed down through generations. It's plausible they shared information, helped each other find patrons, and offered support when one of them fell on hard times. They may have created a kind of shadow sisterhood, a private world of female solidarity that is almost completely invisible in the male-authored historical record. So, when you look at Thais, resplendent in her silk robes, charming a room full of powerful men, you see the complexity. Is she free? Compared to the wife locked in the Guinea icon it is, or the slave girl in the brothel. Absolutely, she has economic agency, social mobility, and intellectual autonomy that are unparalleled. But it's a conditional freedom, a freedom that exists within strict, unwritten boundaries. She is free to be the perfect companion for a man, but not free to be a citizen. She is free to accumulate wealth, but not free to truly own it. She is free to speak her mind, but her words are only valued as long as they are entertaining. She has escaped the physical walls of the home, only to find herself in a larger, more opulent prison of male expectation. Her life is a high wire, performed without a safety net. Now, let's turn the key, push open that heavy wooden door we saw earlier, and step inside the oikos. We're going to enter the world that all this other activity, the symposia, the brothels, the salons of the Hittite is designed to protect. We are entering the domain of the Jai, the legitimate Athenian citizenry, and the first thing you notice is the quiet. After the clamor of the agoran, the forced convivitalia of the men's world, the relative silence of the household is profound. You are now in the central courtyard. It's open to the sky, perhaps with a small altar to Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. In the center, this is the heart of the home, the main source of light and air. The rooms of the house open onto this courtyard. On the ground floor is the andron, the men's dining room we've already visited, which is oft unempty and unused during the day. But the rest of the house, and especially the upper floor, is the Guinea icon it is, the women's quarters. This is where the wife, let's call her Kilton Demis a common name, not necessarily the famous one, spends almost her entire existence. Her world is circumscribed by these walls. Her daily life is a routine of domestic management. Her primary and most respected task is weaving. You see her at a large, upright loom, her hands moving with a practiced, rhythmic skill. Weaving was not just a chore. It was the quintessential feminine virtue. It demonstrated industry, patience, and devotion to the household. The cloth she produces will clothe her family. A woman's skill at the loom was a point of immense pride, sung about in epics like the Odyssey with Penelope at her loom, the very symbol of wifely fidelity. She is not alone. She is the manager of the household slave. She directs them in their tasks, grinding grain, fetching water, cooking, and cleaning. She holds the keys to the storerooms, rationing out supplies of oil, wine, and food. In this, she wields a significant amount of power. The household is her kingdom, and she is its undisputed queen. Her husband is the head of state, dealing with the outside world, but she is the head of the interior, ensuring the smooth, daily functioning of the family unit. But this power is confined. She rarely leaves the house. When she does, it's for a specific, socially sanctioned purpose, a family funeral, a visit to a female neighbor, or to participate in one of the all-female religious festivals like the Euphoria, a multi-day ritual in honor of Demeter and Persephone. And when she goes out, she is never alone. She is veiled, her face hidden from the gaze of strange men, and she is escorted by a male relative or a trusted slave. Her public invisibility is the hallmark of her respectability. A famous speech by the Order Demosthenes sums it up perfectly. We have exterior eye for pleasure, concubines for the daily care of the body, but wives for the purpose of producing legitimate children and to be a faithful guardian of our household. Here's a small, intimate detail of her life. Her marriage was not a love match. She was likely married around the age of 14 or 15 to a man twice her age, a man she may have never even met before the wedding day. The marriage was a contract between her father and her husband, an exchange of property. She came with a dowry, which was her contribution to the new household. This dowry was legally hers, and it had to be returned to her family if the husband divorced her without cause. This provided her with a degree of financial protection, but it also underscored the transactional nature of the union. The relationship with her husband is one of respect and duty, not necessarily of companionship. He spends his days in the agora, his evenings at the symposium. He lives in a world of politics, philosophy, and public debate that she knows almost nothing about. When he comes home, they might share a meal, but their lives are largely separate. Their primary connection is through their children, the heirs she is expected to produce. The debate among historians here is, once again, about the reality versus the ideal. Was the seclusion of wives as strict as the male authors make it out to be? Was their life one of utter boredom and isolation? Some scholars argue yes, that the Guinea Connaught was little more than a comfortable prison. Others suggest a more nuanced picture. They point to the evidence of women's religious festivals, the social networks between female neighbors, and the very real power they wielded within the household. They argue that women created a rich and complex social world for themselves, one that was simply invisible to the men who wrote the history books. You watch Clytemnestra as she inspects the work of a young slave girl, correcting a mistake in the weaving with a gentle but firm hand. Her movements are calm, efficient, and purposeful. She is not a glamorous figure like the Hetoera, nor a tragic one like the Porni. She is the sturdy, silent anchor of Athenian society. Her life may lack the intellectual fireworks of Aspasia Salon or the raw drama of the brothel, but it has a deep, foundational importance. She is the guardian of the future, the producer of the next generation of citizens. Her confinement is the price she pays for her honor, and her honor is the bedrock upon which the entire city is built. Her world is small, but without it, the larger world of men could not exist. Within the quiet walls of the Yorkers, the life of the citizen wife, Clytemnestra, is governed by a single, overriding imperative: procreation. Her body is not her own to enjoy. It is a vessel for the continuation of her husband's lineage. By extension, the Athenian state itself, her desire, her pleasure, her personal fulfillment are all subordinate to this one, sacred duty. Her womb is her primary contribution to the polis. The pressure to produce an heir, specifically a male heir, is immense. A man's entire legacy, his name, his property, his ancestral rights, all depend on having a legitimate son to carry them on. A childless marriage is a disaster, a failure not just for the couple, but for the entire family line. If a wife proves to be barren, it is one of the few socially acceptable reasons for a man to divorce her and marry another younger woman in the hopes of producing an heir. The moment a child is born, its life hangs in the balance, and the decision rests solely with the father. In a ritual called the amphidactyomia, which takes place a few days after the birth, the father carries the newborn and runs around the household hearth. If he completes this ritual, it is a sign that he has accepted the child into his family. If he does not, for any reason, if the child is deformed, if he suspects it is not his, or even if he simply cannot afford to raise another child, he has the right to expose it. This means leaving the infant in a public place, often in a clay pot, to be either picked up by a passerby who might raise it as a slave, or to die. This was a brutal reality of family life, a form of postnatal birth control. The mother has absolutely no say in this decision. If the child is accepted, the mother's role shifts to that of primary caregiver, though she would be assisted by household slaves. Her relationship with her children is likely the most emotionally intimate one she will have in her life. It is in the raising of her sons and daughters that she can exercise a direct and powerful influence. She teaches her daughters the skills they will need to be future wives, weaving, household management, and the importance of modesty and obedience. She instills in her sons their first lessons about honor, duty, and their place in the world. Here's a small, curious detail about childbirth that reveals much about the Greek worldview. Childbirth was seen as a woman's equivalent to a man's battle. It was her moment of life-threatening struggle for the good of the state. The goddess Artemis, the virgin huntress, was paradoxically one of the main deities women prayed to for protection during childbirth. If a woman died in childbirth, her name could be inscribed on a public tombstone, an honor usually reserved for men who died in battle. It was a public acknowledgement of her sacrifice for the polis. Her death in service to the family line was considered as heroic as a soldier's death in service to the city's defense. The double standard is staggering. While the wife's absolute fidelity is non-negotiable, her husband is free to seek pleasure elsewhere. He can visit porn AI, take on a long-term concubine who was often a slave, or pursue relationships with young men. These activities are not seen as a betrayal of the marriage. The marriage is a contract for heirs and household stability. It is not a contract for sexual exclusivity on his part. As long as he fulfills his duty to provide for the household and does not squander the family fortune on his outside dalliances, his behavior is largely accepted. If a wife were to commit adultery, the consequences would be catastrophic. Her lover could be legally killed on the spot by her husband if caught in the act. The woman herself would be publicly shamed and divorced. She would be barred from participating in public religious festivals, effectively making her a social pariah. She could never remarry. Her life would be ruined. The reason for this severity is clear. Her infidelity threatens the very foundation of the system. It casts doubt on the legitimacy of her children. An heir of uncertain paternity cannot inherit property or citizenship. Her affair is not a private matter of the heart. It is an act of treason against the oikos of the state. Historians still puzzle over the emotional reality of these marriages. Was it all just duty and procreation? Or was there room for genuine affection and love to grow over time? The sources, written by men, are mostly silent on this, but funeral monuments sometimes offer a hint. We see carvings of a husband and wife clasping hands, a gesture of partnership. Epitaphs sometimes speak of a husband's grief for a lost wife, praising her not just for her wifely duties but for her sweet disposition and companionship. It's likely that, despite the transactional nature of the marriage contract, many couples did develop deepened loving bonds. But this was a fortunate byproduct, not the primary goal. The wife's role is one of immense responsibility and profound constraint. Her body is the gatekeeper of the city's future. Her virtue is the pillar that supports the entire social structure. She is revered as a mother and a guardian, but she is a prisoner of that reverence. Her entire identity is defined by her reproductive capacity. She is the fertile soil in which the future of Athens is planted. Life inside the Guinea icon it is a world of women. The citizen wife, Kiltendemos, is surrounded by her daughters, her female relatives, and her household slaves. While the official ideology paints her life as one of isolation, the reality was likely a rich and complex tapestry of female relationships, a world almost completely hidden from male viewing, therefore, from the historical record. But we can piece together glimpses of it. Her most significant relationships are likely with the other women of her household. She forms a close bond with a trusted slave woman, perhaps her nurse from childhood who came with her as part of her dowry. This woman is more than a servant. She is a confidant, a friend, the one person with whom she can share her fears about childbirth or her frustrations with her distant husband. This relationship, crossing the rigid barrier of status, is a source of immense emotional support. Her daughters are her apprentices. She teaches them everything she knows, preparing them for the same life of wifely duty that she leads. This bond, a mix of maternal love and professional training, is deep and powerful in a society where her husband and sons will eventually leave her world for the public sphere. Her daughters are her constant companions, her legacy of female knowledge passed down through generations. And then there are the relationships with women outside the home. While her movements are restricted, they are not non-existent. She can visit her female neighbors. These visits are a vital social outlet. The women gather in each other's courtyards, sharing news, exchanging advice on managing their households, and arranging the marriages of their children. It's a powerful, informal network, a grapevine that spreads information throughout the female community. It's here that reputations are made and unmade, and the real social business of the neighborhood gets done. But what about romantic love and desire? With the husband often a distant, older figure, and her life confined to the company of women, it's inevitable that deep, passionate, and sometimes erotic bonds would form between women. This is a topic that history, written by men, is almost entirely silent on, but it would be naive to assume it didn't exist. Our best, and most controversial, evidence comes from the poet Sappho, who lived a couple of centuries earlier on the island of Lesbos. Her poetry, of which only fragments survive, speaks with an astonishing directness and passion about her love for other women. She describes the physical symptoms of desire, the racing heart, the tongue-tied speech, the fire under the skin, with an intensity that is unmatched. While Sappho was not an Athenian and lived in a different time, her work gives us a rare window into the possibility of female-to-female love in the ancient Greek world. In Athens, these relationships would have been lived in the deepest secrecy. They were a world within a world, hidden in the confines of the Gine, Iconides. They posed no threat to the patriarchal structure because they couldn't produce illegitimate heirs. As long as a woman fulfilled her duty to her husband, what she did in the privacy of the women's quarters with her female friends or slaves was largely invisible and, therefore, irrelevant to the man who ruled the city. It was a love that dared not speak its name, not because it was necessarily condemned, but because it simply didn't register in the male-centric view of the world. Here's a small detail that offers a tantalizing hint. Some Athenian vases depict women exchanging gifts, gazing intently at one another, and touching in ways that seem to go beyond simple friendship. One famous vase shows two women, one presenting the other with a flower or a piece of fruit, a common motif in male-female courtship scenes. Are these simply depictions of friendship, or are they a coded acknowledgement of a different kind of love? Scholars are fiercely divided. Some see these as clear evidence of homoerotic relationships between women. Others argue that we are imposing modern categories on ancient images, and that these are simply expressions of the deep, non-sexual homosocial bonds that were common in a gender-segregated society. This debate gets to the heart of the problem. We are trying to understand a world that was deliberately hidden. The Gine icon was designed to be a black box. What happened inside, between the women who inhabited it, was their own secret. It's entirely possible that for many wives, their primary emotional, psychological, and even physical intimacy came not from their husbands, but from the other women with whom they shared their cloistered lives. So, while Kiltendemish presents a placid, dutiful face to the outside world, her inner life may be a storm of emotions and relationships that her husband knows nothing about. She may be deeply in love with a female cousin or a particularly beautiful slave. This hidden love is her private rebellion, her escape. It is a form of freedom that can only exist because of her confinement. The very walls that imprison her also create a sanctuary where a different kind of desire, one unaccountedly undone policed by man, can flourish in secret. It's a silent, invisible counter-narrative to the public, male-dominated story of Athenian desire. Let's step back out of the oikos and return to the public, male world of a gymnasium and a symposium. We've touched on the institution of pederasty, but now let's look closer at the unwritten rules, the social etiquette that governed this complex relationship. It was to free-for-all, to be done correctly. The courtship of an Eromenos by an Aristes had to follow a strict and elaborate protocol. To violate these rules was to risk public shame and dishonor for everyone involved. The first rule was about timing and location. The Aristes could not just approach the boy anywhere. The proper place to hunt, as they sometimes called it, was the gymnasium or the palaestra. These were respectable public locations where the boy was engaged in noble pursuits. To try and corner a boy in a dark alley or a tavern would be seen as predatory and base, the act of a man driven by lust, not by a noble desire for mentorship. The context was everything. The second rule governed the approach itself. The Aristes had to be patient and subtle. He couldn't just rush in with declarations of love. He would begin by simply being present, by watching the boy from a distance. Then, he might start offering praise for the boy's athletic skill or his virtuous conduct. This praise had to be directed at the boy's character, not just his looks. To compliment his discus throw was acceptable. To compliment the shape of his thighs while he did it was crossing a line. The focus had to be on the boy's potential for erudite excellence. The third, and perhaps most important, rule was about the role of the Eromenos. The boy was expected to be resistant. He could not appear eager or receptive to the advances. This was called a duress, a sense of modesty and shame that was considered a hallmark of a well-bred youth. He had to be hard to get. This was just a game. It was a crucial test of both parties. The boy's resistance demonstrated his virtue and proved he was promiscuous. The suitor's persistence, in the face of this resistance, demonstrated the sincerity and depth of his affection. He had to prove he was willing to work for the boy's favor, that he was just looking for an easy conquest. This dynamic is beautifully illustrated on countless Greek vases. You see scenes where the Aristes is reaching out to touch the boy's chin, a gesture of supplication, while the boy looks away, sometimes even raising a hand to gently push him away. Or the Aristes offers a gift, and the boy accepts it with a downcast, modest gaze. It's a carefully choreographed dance of pursuit and reluctance. Here's a quirky and very specific rule of this etiquette, the so-called intersi-rural compromise, the ideal physical expression of this love, as depicted in art and discussed by some writers, was not supposed to involve the boy being penetrated. That would be seen as deeply humiliating for the boy, turning him into a passive, womanly figure and jeopardizing his future status as a dominant male citizen. Instead, a physical manifestation of the delicate social compromise at the heart of the whole institution. Of course, the gap between this idealized etiquette and the messy reality was likely enormous. This is where the debate among classicists gets really heated. Are these rules just a form of propaganda, a high-minded justification for what was often simple sexual exploitation, or were they genuinely followed by most respectable citizens? The courtroom speeches of the era are filled with accusations of men violating this code, of being overly aggressive, of seducing boys with money instead of noble courtship, or of engaging in inappropriate physical acts. The very fact that these accusations were so common suggests that the rules were frequently broken. The courtship also involved the boy's family. A serious Aristes would have to gain the approval of the boy's father or guardian. He was, in essence, asking for permission to educate the son. This added another layer of social negotiation. The father had to assess the suitor's character and status. Was this a man who would bring honor to his son and his family? Or was he a disreputable character who might damage the boy's reputation? The father's role was to be the gatekeeper, protecting his son's virtue and market value. The entire system was a performance of self-control. The Aristes had to perform his role as the restrained, wise mentor. The Eromenos had to perform his role as the modest, virtuous beloved. The father had to perform his role as the diligent guardian. And all of this was done under the watchful eye of the community. A misstep by anyone could lead to public ridicule and lasting disgrace. The love may have been personal, but the courtship was inescapably public. It was a high-stakes social game. And these rules were the only thing that separated an honorable, city-strengthening bond from a shameful, private vice. You've seen the complex rituals of pederasty on the ground, in the gymnasia and at the symposia. You've felt the tension of the performance, the delicate balance of desire and restraint. Now, let's ascend to the realm of ideas and see how the greatest minds of Athens tried to make sense of it all. Let's look at the gap between the messy reality you've witnessed and the lofty ideal promoted by philosophers, most famously by Plato. In Plato's dialogues, particularly the Symposium and the Phaedrus, the love between an older man and a youth is lifted from the dusty wrestling school and placed on a pedestal of pure, philosophical light. Plato takes the raw material of this social institution and attempts to sublimate it, to transform it from a potentially sordid affair into the highest form of human connection, a pathway to truth and beauty itself, in his famous ladder of love. As described by Socrates in the Symposium, the love for a beautiful boy is just the first, lowest rung. A true lover, a philosopher, doesn't stop there. He is supposed to use his love for one beautiful body to recognize the beauty in all bodies. From there, he ascends to appreciating the beauty of souls, which is far superior to physical beauty. Then he moves higher still, to loving the beauty of laws and institutions, and then the beauty of knowledge. Finally, at the very top of the ladder, he glimpses the ultimate form of beauty itself, absolute, eternal, and divine. In this Platonic framework, the physical desire is not the goal. It's the engine. It's the spark that starts the philosophical journey. A good Aristides doesn't seek to possess the boy's body for his own gratification. Instead, he uses their shared erotic energy to guide both of their souls upward, toward the realm of the forms. The relationship becomes a joint philosophical quest. The physical act itself becomes almost irrelevant, a crude and primitive expression of a love that should be aimed at the eternal. This is the origin of the term Platonic love as we understand it today, a love devoid of physical desire. This is a stunningly beautiful and influential idea. It took a deeply problematic social practice and gave it a transcendent purpose. It offered a best-case scenario, a way to engage in pederasty that was not only socially acceptable, but was the noblest pursuit a man could undertake. It's an intellectual defense mechanism of the highest order. Now, contrast this with what you've actually seen in the streets of Athens. You've seen the winks and nudges in the agora, the crude jokes on the comic stage, the anxiety over gifts, and the very real power imbalances. You've heard the whispers about men who are clearly more interested in a boy's physique than his soul. You've seen the system's potential for jealousy, possessiveness, and exploitation. The Athens of Plato's Symposium feels like a different city from the one you've been walking through. Here's a small detail that highlights this chasm between ideal and reality. The word Plato uses for this higher love is eros, but in everyday Greek, eros simply meant intense, passionate desire, and it almost always had a strong sexual connotation. Plato's special achievement was to try and redefine this powerful, often chaotic force as something pure and philosophical. It's a testament to his genius, but it was also a bit of a marketing ploy for his particular brand of philosophy. He was trying to co-opt the most powerful energy in Athenian social life and channel it towards his own intellectual ends. This creates a huge debate for historians. Was Plato describing a reality that actually existed for a small, elite circle of philosopher lovers? Was he describing an ideal that he hoped his followers would aspire to? Or was he simply providing a convenient, unnoble-sounding alibi for the behavior of his wealthy, aristocratic friends? The cynical view is that all the talk of souls and forms was just a fancy way to justify the sexual pursuit of teenage boys. It put a beautiful, philosophical gloss on what was, at its core, a system of desire and power. The truth is probably that both realities existed simultaneously. There may well have been men like Socrates who genuinely tried to live up to this ideal, who saw their relationships with young men as primarily educational and spiritual. But for every one Socrates, there were probably 100 other men for whom the ladder of love was just an attractive theory they could discuss at a party before getting down to the more earthly business of seduction. The tension between the Platonic ideal and the street-level reality is the central drama of Athenian sexuality. The society produced this incredible, lofty philosophy of love, one that still influences us today. But it also practiced a version of that love that was often messy, transactional, and deeply compromised. The Athenians lived in the gap between what they preached and what they practiced. They reached for the stars, philosophically speaking, but their feet were planted firmly in the mud of human desire, and it is in this gap, between the ideal and the real, that the true, complicated nature of their world is revealed. Every relationship has an ending. For the bond between an Aristes and his Euromenos, the end is not just a possibility, it is a biological certainty, written into the very fabric of the institution. The clock starts ticking from the moment the courtship begins, and it stops at a very specific, visible moment, the arrival of the first beard. As the Euromenos, you've been living in this strange bubble of admiration and mentorship for a few years. You are now perhaps 19 or 20. You've been the beautiful, beloved youth. But one morning, you look in your bronze mirror and you see them. The first dark, coarse hairs sprouting on your chin and upper lip. This is not a cause for celebration. It is a signal that the game is over. In the aesthetic vocabulary of the Greeks, the smooth-cheeked youth was the pinnacle of male beauty. The bearded man was something else entirely. He was a full-grown citizen, an adult, the bloom of youth, the he, as Frieder. The relationship with your Aristes must now change. The erotic element, which was always supposed to be secondary to the mentorship, must now officially cease. To continuous actual relationship with a bearded man was seen as unseemly, even ridiculous. The comic playwrights loved to mock older men who still pursued youths who were past their prime. The dynamic of pursuer and pursued, of mentor and student, is no longer socially legible once both parties are recognized as adult men. What happens next? Ideally, the relationship transforms. The Aristes has fulfilled his duty. He has guided you to the threshold of manhood. Now, he steps back and becomes a different kind of figure in your life. A lifelong friend, a political ally, a mentor in a new, non-erotic sense. The bond of affection and loyalty is supposed to remain, translating into a powerful social and political alliance. You will support him in the assembly, and he will continue to use his influence to aid your career. The old pederastic couple becomes a new pair of respected colleagues. This was the stated goal, the successful graduation from the program. You, the former Euromenos, now have a new set of duties. It's time for you to marry a young citizen girl, to start your own oikos, and to produce legitimate heirs. It is time for you to take your place as a full, active citizen, and, in a few years, it will be your turn to go to the gymnasium, to watch the next generation of beautiful youths, and to become an Aristes yourself. You complete the cycle, moving from the pursued to the pursuer, from the student to the mentor. The system perpetuates itself. But what if the ending isn't so neat? What if the Aristes is not willing to let go? His affection might have been genuine, and the end of the erotic component of the relationship could be a source of real grief and jealousy. He might resent the fact that you are now his equal, that you no longer look up to him with the same youthful admiration. The transition from lover to friend could be awkward and painful, and from your perspective, the end of the relationship could be a moment of great uncertainty. You have been defined for years by your status as the beloved of so-and-so. You have enjoyed the prestige and the protection that came with it. Now, you are on your own. You have to prove yourself as a man, not just as a beautiful boy. The pressure is on to make a successful transition. Here's a fascinating and somewhat dark aspect of this transition that legal speeches hint at. What if the Aristes was abusive or exploitative? The end of the relationship could be a moment of reckoning. The former Euromenos, now an adult citizen with the right to speak in court, could potentially seek revenge on his former lover. He could bring a lawsuit, accusing the older man of hubris or of failing in his duties as a mentor. These trials would be messy and scandalous, with both sides slinging mud and revealing intimate details to discredit the other. The end of a pederastic relationship could, in some cases, be the beginning of a lifelong political rivalry. Historians are still piecing together the long-term effects of this system. Did it, as its proponents claim, create strong bonds of loyalty that strengthened the city? Or did it create a generation of men who, having been in a submissive role in their youth, were overly aggressive and domineering as adults to compensate? It's an unanswerable question, as the psychological impact would have varied with each individual. There was no single outcome, only a spectrum of possibilities, from lifelong, supportive friendships to bitter, enduring enmities. You stand before the mirror, tracing the new, unfamiliar texture on your chin. Your time as an object of desire is over. Your time as a subject of power is just beginning. You are no longer the vase. You are the potter. The transition is both a liberation and a burden. You have graduated, but the lessons you learned in the fraught, intoxicating, and morally ambiguous school of Athenian desire will shape the man you are about to become for the rest of your life. In a society as obsessed with law and order as Athens, it's natural to wonder, were these relationships of desire, from the fleeting transaction in a brothel to the multi-year bond of pederasty, ever formalized? Was there a desire contract? The answer is complex and reveals, once again, the Athenian genius for blending the personal with the legal. For the most part, these arrangements operated on unwritten rules and social pressure. Honor, reputation, and the fear of public shaming were the primary enforcement mechanisms. However, we have tantalizing hints that in some cases, desire was indeed bound by something approaching a written contract. Let's start with the world of the Hetaira. A wealthy man who wanted to secure the exclusive company of a famous Hetaira for a long period wouldn't just rely on a verbal agreement. He might draw up a formal contract. These documents, which have not survived but are described in legal speeches, would have been incredibly detailed. They would specify the duration of the arrangement, the amount of the allowance or payment, and the expectations for both parties. The contract might stipulate that the Hetaira could not see other clients, and in return, the patron would agree to provide her with a house, clothing, and slaves. This was, in essence, a high-end rental agreement. The Hetaira was leasing her companionship, and the contract was the legal framework for that lease. Of course, this raises thorny legal questions, since the Hetaira was usually a non-citizen. Her ability to enforce this contract was limited. If the patron decided to simply stop paying, her legal recourse was weak. She would have to rely on her male citizen sponsor prostates to sue on her behalf. The contract offered a measure of security, but it was far from ironclad. It was a tool in a negotiation, a way of making the terms of a deeply personal and unequal relationship explicit. Now, let's turn to the even more surprising and controversial area. Pederasty. Could a relationship between an Aristes and an Eromenos be governed by a contract? The official ideology would be horrified by this idea. Their bond was supposed to be about noble love and mentorship, not a commercial transaction. To put it in writing would be to admit it was a business deal, which would be deeply shameful. And yet, we have at least one shocking piece of evidence that suggests it might have happened. A fragment from a 4th century BC comic play by the poet and Axandrides describes a pederasty contract. The play mocks a man for being so meticulous and untrusting that he actually draws up a written agreement with his beloved dead father. The contract supposedly stipulated the duration of the relationship, the specific gifts to be given, and even rules of conduct. This is comedy, so it's an exaggeration, but good satire is always based on a kernel of truth. The joke works because the audience would have recognized the possibility, however absurd, of such a contract existing. It points to a deep-seated anxiety about the transactional nature of these relationships. What if the gifts weren't just gifts, but installments in a payment plan? What if the mentorship was just a service being rendered? A written contract would strip away the romantic facade and reveal the cold, hard commerce underneath. This leads to a point of debate for legal historians. While a formal pederasty contract was likely a comic invention, other, more standard legal agreements could be used to achieve the same end. For example, if a boy came from a poor family, his wealthy Aristes might not give him gifts directly. Instead, he could provide a loan to the boy's father, with the unspoken understanding that the loan would never be called in as long as the relationship continued, or he might arrange for a fraudulent adoption, making the boy his legal heir as a way of transferring wealth and securing the relationship. These would be ways of using existing legal tools to formalize a desire-based relationship, hiding the true nature of the agreement behind a more respectable legal fiction. Even in the brothel, a contract existed, albeit a brutal one. As the slave-prostitute Lyra, you are bound by a contract of ownership. Your master, P.H. Rain O.S., has a bill of sale for you. That document is your contract. It gives him absolute legal authority over your body. It is the ultimate desire contract, one where one party has all the rights and the other has none. So, while Athens may not have had a standard template for a love contract, the city's legal and commercial instincts permeated every aspect of life, including its most intimate relationships. They used the tools they had, rental agreements, debt contracts, sales receipts, to regulate and formalize desire where social pressure alone was not enough. They created a paper trail of what these contracts, whether real or satirical, reveal a fundamental truth about Athenian society. They were masters of compartmentalities. They could celebrate the transcendent, philosophical nature of love in a platonic dialogue, while simultaneously, in a courthouse down the road, arguing over the financial clauses in an agreement that leased a woman's companionship for a year. The sacred and the contractual were not opposites. They were just two different ways of managing the same powerful, unpredictable human impulse. Let's take a short sea voyage away from Athens to the wealthy and famously decadent city of Corinth. Corinth was a major commercial hub, a port city that connected the trade routes of the eastern and western Mediterranean. And like many port cities throughout history, it had a reputation for being a place where anything could be bought and sold. Here, the business of desire took on a unique and, to outsiders, shocking form, so-called sacred prostitution. High on a hill overlooking the city, on a fortified acropolis known as the Acrocorinth, stood a magnificent temple dedicated to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and desire. This was just any temple, according to ancient writers, most famously the geographer Strabo. This temple was home to more than 1,000 temple slaves, or hierarchu, les hero, DULOI, women who served the goddess by engaging in sexual acts with the worshippers who came to her temple. The idea was that the act of sex, performed within the sacred precinct of the temple, was a form of worship, a tribute to the goddess of love herself. A merchant visiting Corinth might go up to the temple, make a donation, and then commune with the goddess through one of her servants. The money he paid was not a fee for a service, but an offering to the temple treasury. It was a way of laundering a commercial transaction through a religious ritual, elevating a base act into a sacred one. Imagine the scene. You make the steep climb up to the Acrocorinth. The view is breathtaking, with the blue waters of the Gulf of Corinth on one side and the Saronic Gulf on the other. You pass through the gates of the temple precinct. The air is heavy with the scent of expensive incense sacrificial offerings. You see wealthy merchants from across the Greek world, soldiers and sailors, all coming to pay their respects to Aphrodite. And moving among them are the priestesses and the hierarchules, women dedicated to the temple. The experience was designed to feel holy, transcendent, a far cry from the sordid to old brothels of Athens. This practice provided Corinth with a significant source of revenue. The Temple of Aphrodite was essentially a massively profitable, state-sanctioned enterprise, attracting tourists and their money from all over. The city's prosperity and its reputation for licentiousness were two sides of the same coin, both flowing from the cult of its patron goddess. But let's pull back the curtain of religious piety. Who were these sacred slaves? For the most part, they were likely just that, slaves. They may have been women captured in war, or girls sold to the temple by their families. Some may have been dedicated to the goddess by wealthy patrons as a form of offering. It's highly unlikely that this was a voluntary career choice for most of them. Their lives were probably not much different from those of the poor Nai in Athens. except that their exploitation was cloaked in the language of divine service. Their bodies were still commodities, but here, the pimp was a high priest, and the profits went to a goddess. This is where we hit one of the most intense and ongoing debates in the study of ancient history. Did sacred prostitution, as described by Strabo, actually exist on this scale? The archaeological evidence is surprisingly thin. Excavations at the Temple of Aphrodite in Corinth have not uncovered the vast complex of dormitories that would have been needed to house 1,000 women. There are no inscriptions from the temple itself that explicitly describe this practice. This has led some historians to become deeply skeptical. They argue that the stories of Corinth as temple prostitutes were largely an invention of later, often Roman, writers. They suggest it might have been a form of negative branding, a way for rival cities or moralizing authors to portray Corinth as corrupt and decadent. The stories might have been based on a much smaller scale reality, or they could have been an exaggeration of practices from the Near East, where temple prostitution was more common, which were then mapped onto Corinth to create a sensational narrative. Other scholars defend the traditional account, arguing that the lack of evidence isn't proof of absence, and that the literary sources are too consistent to be dismissed entirely. The very existence of this debate tells a story. It shows how difficult it is to separate religious practice from economic reality in the ancient world. Was this sincere piety? Was it a cynical business model dressed up in religious robes? Or was it a complex mixture of both? For the man visiting the temple, he could tell himself he was performing a pious act, while still satisfying his physical desires. It was the perfect, guilt-free transaction, regardless of the scale. The idea of sacred prostitution at Corinth was a powerful one in the ancient world. It represented the ultimate fusion of desire, commerce, and religion. It took the most basic human transaction and elevated it to the level of the divine. It showed that in the Greek world, there was no corner of human experience, not even the temple itself, that couldn't be integrated into the sprawling, complex, and endlessly fascinating business of desire. It was a place where you could save your soul and satisfy your lust at the same time, for the right price. After touring the full spectrum of Athenian desire, from the depths of the brothel to the heights of the Acro-Corinth, you might be wondering, did anyone in Athens ever stop and say, "Oh darn, this is all a bit much"? Was there any critique, any pushback against this highly stratified, transcational, and often exploitative system? The answer is yes. And the sharpest critiques came from the very people who were often at the center of it all, the philosophers. Let's go back to the Agora and find a shady spot to listen to the city's most famous social critic. Socrates, as we've seen through Plato, was deeply embedded in the pederastic culture of the intellectual elite. He was known for his love of beautiful young men like Alcibiades, and yet his entire philosophical project was a critique of the unexamined life, and that included the unexamined life of desire. Socrates' method was to challenge the conventional wisdom. He would have seen a man boasting about his expensive hetaira or his handsome Eromenos and started asking his famously annoying questions. You say you love this boy. What is love? Is it merely the desire for a beautiful body? But the body withers. So, what is it you truly love? And you say this relationship makes him a better citizen. By what standard? Are you teaching him virtue? Or are you just teaching him to please you? He would peel back the layers of self-satisfied rhetoric to expose the contradictions and self-deceptions underneath. His critique was a moralistic condemnation. It was an intellectual one. He was saying this is wrong, but you don't even know what you're redoing or why you're redoing it. Then there were the cynics, philosophers like Diogenes, who took a much more direct and confrontational approach. Diogenes famously lived in a barrel and rejected all social conventions as phony and unnatural. He would have looked at the whole elaborate performance of Athenian desire and laughed. The expensive gifts for an Eromenos, the flowery poetry for a hetaira, the strict separation of wife and prostitute. He would have seen it all as absurd, artificial nonsense. A famous, if probably apocryphal, story about Diogenes perfectly captures his critique. He was once seen masturbating in the marketplace in broad daylight. When people were shocked and reprimanded him, he supposedly replied, "If only it were so easy to soothe my hunger by rubbing my belly." His point was brutally direct. Desire is a simple, natural, physical need, like hunger. All the elaborate social rituals, the mores, the poetry, the philosophical justifications, it's all just a ridiculous complication of a basic biological urge. He was puncturing the balloon of Athenian romantic and social pretensions with the sharp pin of radical simplicity. The Stoics, who came a bit later, offered another line of critique. They preached a philosophy of self-control and detachment from worldly passions. They would have looked at a man spending a fortune on a hetaira or consumed with jealousy over his eromanosm, seen a man who was a slave to his emotions. For the Stoics, true freedom was freedom from a disorderly soul. To be governed by lust, love, or jealousy was to be in a state of sickness. Their ideal was a man who could manage his desires through reason, engaging in sex for the rational purpose of procreation within marriage, and remaining untroubled by the chaotic passions that ruled the lives of most men. And what did they think of the different classes of women? While most philosophers accepted the basic social structure, some offered glimmers of a different vision. Plato, in his utopian work The Republic, famously argued that, in the ideal state, the guardian class should include women. These female guardians would receive the same education and military training as men, and they would not be confined to the home. This was a radical, almost unthinkable idea for most Athenians. However, even Plato's feminism is a subject of intense scholarly debate. Is he truly arguing for the equality of women? Or is he just being ruthlessly pragmatic, arguing that the state is wasting half of its potential talent by sequestering women? His proposal also involved abolishing the traditional family and having women and children be held in common, a solution that many find more chilling than liberating. It's a classic example of a philosopher critiquing the existing system, but offering a solution that is, in its own way, just as problematic. So yes, there was a constant, simmering philosophical commentary on the business of desire in Athens, but it's important to understand the nature of this critique. It was rarely a call for social revolution. The philosophers were advocating for women's rights or the abolition of slavery in the brothels. Their critique was primarily aimed at the free, adult male citizen. It was a call for him to master himself, to align his desires with reason, and to live a more virtuous and examined life. They were more concerned with the soul of the consumer than with the suffering of the product. But in their questioning and their search for a more rational way of life, they laid bare the anxieties and contradictions at the very heart of their society. The sun is setting over Athens. For your final evening, you've made the climb up to the Acropolis. The crowds of the day have thinned, and a hush has fallen over the sacred rock. You stand before the Parthenon, its pentlyseum marble glowing a deep, impossible gold in the last rays of the sun. The air up here is cleaner, cooler. It's a world away from the noise and smells of the city sprawling below you. From this vantage point, Athens looks perfect, orderly. You can see the dark block of the Agora, now quiet and empty. You see the tangled rooftops of the residential quarters, where the oikoi are shutting their doors for the night. Further out, you can just make out the haze of the Keramikos. Up here, surrounded by these monuments to reason, democracy, and divine order, you can almost believe the idealized version of the story. This is the Athens of Pericles' funeral oration, a city of noble citizens, devoted to beauty and wisdom, a school for all Greece. The Parthenon, in its mathematical perfection, seems to proclaim that this is a city governed by logic and harmony. The Heracleion, with its graceful caryatids, the sculpted female figures serving as columns, presents an image of serene, ordered femininity in service to the state. This is the official story. The one Athens tells about itself, carved in marble and raised to the heavens. But now you know the truth. You know that the gleaming marble of the Parthenon was funded, in part, by the tribute of a resentful empire and by the taxes on the city's commerce, including the poor ikontelos, the tax on the brothels where women, like Lyra, were sold for 2 obols. You know that for every serene carry added on the temple, There were 1,000 real women like Kilt and Demis, confined to their homes, their lives circumscribed by the duty of procreation. The serene, public face of Athenian womanhood was built on the strict confinement and categorization of actual women. You look down at the city and you can almost see the entire system laid out before you. You see the flow of men from the agora to the gymnasia, from the lac orts to the symposia. You can picture the web of relationships. The Aristes courting his Eromenos with carefully chosen gifts. The husband returning to his dutiful wife. The sailor making his way to the Karamikoas. It's a complex, compartmentalized ecosystem of desire, where every need has its place, its price, and its social justification. Here's one final, strange detail to contemplate as you watch the light fade. In Athens, the law was obsessed with protecting property and religious sanctity. If a man vandalized one of these statues on the Acropolis, chipping a nose off a sculpture of a god, he could be charged with impiety, a capital crime. He could be executed for damaging a block of sacred marble. Yet, if that same man went down to a brothel and beat a slave prostitute to death, the legal crime was not murder. It was the destruction of property. Her owner, Phrenos, could sue him for her market value. The life of a sacred stone was, in the eyes of the law, worth more than the life of a disposable human being. This single, stark comparison reveals more about the city's true values than any philosophical treatise, and this leads to the great, unanswerable question that historians still fight over. Was this system a source of Athens' strength or its weakness? There is a compelling argument that this very comprehension endlessly, this ability to channel and manage desire, is what allowed Athenian men to focus their energies on philosophy, politics, and war, thus fueling the Golden Age. By creating specific, contained outlets for every kind of desire, they freed the higher pursuits from the disruptions of passion. But there's an equally compelling counterargument. Did this system, built on such profound hypocrisy and exploitation, create deep-seated social and psychological tensions that ultimately weakened the city from within? Did the treatment of women, slaves, and foreigners as mere instruments for citizen male gratification foster a kind of arrogance and moral rot that contributed to the city's eventual downfall? Did the beautiful, rational order of the Acropolis rest on a foundation so unjust that it was doomed to crack? The sun has finally dipped below the horizon. Below you, a few scattered oil lamps begin to flicker to life, tiny sparks in the growing darkness. You have seen this city in all its glory and all its squalor. You've heard the philosophers debate the nature of love and seen the grim reality of its sale. You've understood that in Athens, desire was never simple. It was business. It was politics. It was religion. It was education. And it was a source of both the city's greatest artistic achievements and its most profound human failings. Your journey is over. You came seeking the cradle of Western civilization and found a complex, contradictory city of gods and mortals, of profound ideas and base transactions, all bathed in the warm, unforgiving light of the Mediterranean sun. The last light drains from the sky, and the marble around you seems to fade into the deep indigo of the night. The sharp edges of the Parthenon soften, its solid form becoming a silhouette against the first stars. The sounds of the city, which had reached you even up here as a distant hum, now begin to dissolve into a single, low murmur, the gentle breathing of a city settling into sleep. It's time to let the details go. The names Aspasia, Lyra, Socrates, Kilt and Demis, they soften and fade, their stories woven back into the great, quiet tapestry of the past. The arguments of the historians, the clink of oboes, the verses of Sappho, they all become whispers carried on the night breeze, drifting away from you now. You are no longer standing on that rocky hill. You are drifting, floating gently back from that ancient world, carried on the quiet tide of time. Feel the weight of the journey lifting from your shoulders. Let the images dissolve like watercolor in the rain. The sun-baked dust of the agora, the smoky air of the symposium, the cool shadows of the oikos, they are just memories now, and even memories can be heavy. Let them go. Your only focus now is the soft background hum in your own room, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. In undoubt, a quiet, peaceful current pulling you further and further into comfort, into rest. There are no more questions to answer, no more scenes to witness. The story is over. All that is left is the gentle, welcoming silence of the night. The end of the article. Good night.